I would go as far as to say that you can't truly begin any sort of self actualization until you start to fast, until you go through the process of there's hunger, depends on when and how you start the process. Uh, there can be exercise induced where you get into these latter stages faster, but then you have other things you're dealing with physiologically and with your will. And then you've got the slow grinding, weeks to months long fasting that exercises a certain continuity of selfhood. You reach into the self and you think to yourself, you state to yourself, you proclaim to yourself, I can do this, or I can't do this. This is too hard. And somehow, through the passage of time, you've made it. Oftentimes, you've made it because you don't have any other choice. So starvation is when you didn't plan it. Fasting is when you've decided to do it. Do you have to have access to necessary provisions, i.e. food, in order to effectively choose a fast? Well, at least in our culture, you always have access to something. I mean, this may be said in a very callous way for people who are in remote areas and, might have to take a bus 50 miles or so before they even get to a food pantry, or are able to get to a store where they can spend an EBT card or get assistance from someone. And the reason it's so important to bring that up is because that's the times we're in. That's where we're headed. Those who sat back in pride, thinking that they're so independent, as they short-sightedly, capitalistically did what they needed to do, and you watch the people pass away all around them. You watch the unfortunate circumstances happen to all the people around them because they chose not to see. They chose not to see how they are like a subparticle, a quark of many quarks, of a family, a grouping of quarks. Usually 6 is the count on a molecular scale, and there's always a center point. There's this area that is being understood more through science, in my estimation, as to be the epicenter for these energies to culminate through revolution. And gets a little more into primer field technology if you ever want to look that up, if there's any information left on YouTube or anywhere else about this. But fasting excites your molecules. Fasting ignites your endocrine system into not a theoretical, functional equilibrium, but in a sense, at least with our self-perception, it bends time. You're racing through time when you're very hungry, and these hormones, this glandular excretion that takes place, and this clearing out, this cleansing, becomes more temporal and more as a construct, a phenomenon that is happening now in this time and place. And if you really think about it, it's the only thing that we effectively, without the application of assumed instrumentation, existential components of the self, the cyborg, if you will, the phone, the pen, the degree in order to alleviate a separation of communication, babble, to where now you're using completely different etymological constants that the laymen don't understand. And it's not that they couldn't understand or that they don't. In their dialect of speech, they say the same thing just when they're using an expletive or just when they're intending on something. And that's where the world becomes a very murky place. But in this place of the will, of that nose to the grindstone, when you are fasting and you are capable of fasting. And I really think that there's an evolution, whether or not you go into the fast to lose weight, whether you go in to spiritually cleanse, whether it's sort of a self-deprecating measure where you're just, you're depriving yourself of something, but you're also making a statement that how important am I? How important is my self-indulgence? How many times, how many burgers can you eat? How many times can you smack on this? And how seriously can you take these taste buds and leading into other wants and desires that you can't trust, that never led into anything? You could use the argument that a calorie is a measurement of heat, that it provides us energy so that we can do things. But in truth, we really do most of the things that we set out to do and accomplish in our lives when we're skipping those meals altogether. Sure, you might go home and have a big meal every few days in order to power up again. I mean, there's that age-old adage where you've got the computer scientists crunching numbers and eating nothing but donuts and getting those monosaccharides quickly delivered, that quick processed flour delivered, so that all that blood isn't sitting in the stomach. And sure, chronically over time, terrible thing to do. In your youth, you might be able to get away with it for a little while, but there are ramifications to that, right? When we eat the healthy foods, the brown rice, the things that we should eat, the fiber-rich foods, the foods with roughage, we can't go to sleep on that. Many of these could be even considered nightshade foods, and in particular, certain individuals can't process it at all. So there we are, sitting there as we're supposed to be slipping into this sort of hypnagogic dream state, and all the blood is in our stomach. We want to circulate that blood throughout the periphery. We want systemic inspiration, the inspiration of air, the expiration of air. We want metabolism. And that can only be achieved when we're going through these bouts of heavy fasting. Walking is essential, and you don't see many people out there doing it. And when you do see them doing it, they're gossipy. They're, not walking very long distances. And they're usually with buddies where they don't have any self-reflection. They're not in a fast. They are not in a walk. And when the time comes to eat, back to the indulgence, back to the opulence. So choosing very specific foods like brown rice, water, and possibly lentils with spices that don't make the food taste so good, but offer medicinal effects, such as salt, such as potassium, such as curry, such as cayenne pepper. These things all have, now sure, there'd be contraindications with some individuals with IBS or other issues, but you've got a healing process that's taking place where amino acids compete with one another, and we want to get that most abundant amino acid in the human body up to the profiles that allow us to be at our optimal as we're bringing that profile up on a chronic basis. And so this isn't something that just stores and stays steady state. It is in our fidelity and our interest to take things like protein powder that in the future we're not going to have a lot of access to. And so glutamine becomes the thing that heals the gastrointestinal tract, that heals the brain. And then we get into the nervous system and a lot of the ailments that come from that, you know, with MS, multiple sclerosis, you know, a degradation of the Schwann cells. And how do we build that up, you know, with vitamin Bs. Vitamin Bs, our nervous system thrives on those Bs. And those, the B6, like the paradoxin, the B12, the B1, I mean, the B family in general is extremely important, but specific ones for amino acid synergies to take place. Vitamin C as well. Look up Linus Pauling's work on that. For him to do so many amazing things, then to live down on the Big Sur coastline, which is just miles away from here, and then to have kind of the fourth tier to his rhapsody, right? His metanoia, if you will, to be vitamin C. It's not something you should look past. You should really take that to heart. So, in the recognition of Billy J. Saley and Heal with Amino Acids and Nutrients, it is very important for you to understand these things if you are to gain the benefits. And this is personally my walk. Do I call myself a nutritionist that follows some sort of conformist view? I've been a nutritional counselor, just certifications, and wellness counselor. I've had different nutrition certifications. I've had a sports nutrition certification, no degree. I've studied the hell out of the things that I've studied in the past, in the far distant past, and been able to, you know, recite things more verbatim. I'm not going to say that I was ever an expert in the area, but I am becoming, at 54 years old, an expert in myself. The things that work, the things that don't work. When I have focused all my efforts and my energies toward gathering up supposed information that's matriculating about the field in society as a grouping of people who accept certain constants and norms. But in the world of amino acids and synergistic responses, along with fasting, along with inspiring exercise, inspiring the air, expiring the air, the anabolism and the catabolism with metabolism, and the understanding that all calories are not alike, that it may seem or appear as if when you are in ketosis that this is just another form of our body utilizing a macronutrient in order to produce ATP, adenosine triphosphate, energy, fuel. But we find that it changes us. It changes not only physically the way we look and appear, but there is an intrinsic alteration that occurs chronically when we stay on a certain diet. The same could be said for when we skip the fat altogether and just focus on healthy carbohydrate sources. We're just going to say there is a little bit of fat, tiny minute amount of fat, oil, a little bit of protein, but predominantly complex carbohydrates, with those carbohydrate sources that we should be taking, such as brown rice, beans, if you want to argue with Pythagoras on that, and Other things that give us the fibrous sources, cruciferous vegetables or broccoli or cauliflower, things that have a lot of other nutrients. But whether or not our bodies can unlock those nutrients is the subject of the day, every day, all the time. And so we need to be hungry. We need to inspire the amino acid response with respect to enzymes, the amylase, the protease, the lipase, the constituents that break down the macronutrients, and the process that we go through with respect to proteins, where we go, through the food product of protein, and further that is broken down into hydrolyzed protein and then into muscle nitrogen. And then finally, we see this profound effect as we become this gaseous solution, in so to speak terms, in a more esoteric way, to say that we are now representing more of what we are. That we are in a transitory state of being and becoming. That to constantly eat is the way of, it's like the animism, right? The kind of reverence and belief that all living organisms really have this soul force, but going into an understanding that without intellect, that's all we really are. Is that sure, you're still an intellectual animal, but as long as you're following your base needs and your desires, you are living according to sort of the beast, right? The beastly code. But once there's this transcendence, and so without the metabolic cueing, and whether or not that happened first, like in times of grief, people are shown that, like, you're hitting the stop sign, you're hitting the brakes, your airbags are going off in life. There's this automatic system that you're about to hit the wall, that this profound truth has come upon you, that it is not, you are not living in this protective bubble in this carnal-based world, that you're this little bubble, this little ball, this little orb, this little sphere that's traveling on with that Pangloss hope, and that inevitably, invariably, there's a transitory union with all those constructs that you call family members, places, times, things, and events that will travel through this passage of time. And the only way that we can really exercise the tolerance of this is to push ourselves, is to remind ourselves that self-will is always evident through the fasting stages. And I really do believe that this is where certain arcane sects of a form of Christianity, where John the Baptist or his brother James, which is off on a tangent in an entirely different scope of practice, but similar to what I'm saying, is that you see someone who fasted. You see someone who was on fire for God, for probity, for purity, for truth. You see someone who is living off of, and I've brought this up many times, but it's always a reminder every time I'm going through this for months long. And now I've been doing protein fasting for the last couple months. A profound transformation within the self that you can always be pointed at, oh, you're just superficial. Oh, you just care about your abs. Oh, you're doing this for all the wrong reasons. Existentially, isn't that what's happening? We're always being chastised. We're always being cast out and rejected. And that final rejection is where we are going to ultimately, regardless. And so John the Baptist eating wild locust and honey, wild honey, right? We're talking about honey that not only had medicinal effects and not only helped purify the system, but the locust that was high in protein, low in fat, very little to no carbohydrates, but predominantly very high quality amino acids. And to be able to say and understand that this is physically what aligns me with this profound experience, metanoia, and to further go on, there becomes this spiritual food, if you will, that can only be reached through the absence and through the conditioning process of fasting. So do I believe in fasting? Absolutely. I think you should look into it, but never go into anything without consulting with some sort of doctor, professional, or doing your own research and trying to find out as much as you possibly can, especially if you've got some metabolic syndrome or disease happening there, dis-ease, where you've got some issues with your insulin or your liver or your kidneys. I'm talking about from an assumed healthy state where there are no contraindications or preconditions. But one thing is true is that water is always there. You've got to have an ample supply, really an endless supply of fresh water. And those things are being stripped from us. You know, I'm sure John the Baptist would have mentioned going and buying himself 50 gallons of water if he wasn't able to just go down to the river where they would be baptized, go down to the river where they could drink endless supply of water. So I would gather to say that if he was on a diet like that, much of his time was spent walking in deep contemplation, lamenting, and ruminating, but also drinking gallons and gallons of water. And that water, as a crucible that we are, becomes something else when it is inside of us. And getting back to the concepts of gases and solutions, well, that's pretty much what we're made of. Purify yourself.